Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to the Bitcoin Stoa. Today is October 6th, 2021. And for any first-time listeners here today, the Bitcoin Stoa is a community-funded platform. So if you enjoy listening, you can support the project by sending some sats to the QR code on our homepage at bitcoinstoa.com. With that said, it's my honor to welcome Bob Burnett, who has kindly donated his time this afternoon to be here with us. Bob, welcome to the Stoa.
Thank you, Nick. A pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So just to kind of kick things off, people who don't know you, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and how you came to discover Bitcoin. And based on that, we'll go where it takes us.
Yeah, sure. So as is probably evident for those watching on video, I'm an older member of the community. I'm an engineer by trade. So I have a degree in computer science, electrical engineering. Out of school in the mid 80s, I got a job with a company called Zenith. Again, older members will remember it as one of the major TV brands, but
I remember
what history
that.
might not remember is that in the early days of the personal computer, they were also one of the largest personal computer companies. And so that was my first job out of school. And by pure luck, I got assigned as a junior member of a design team on what I think you could arguably call the first laptop computer ever created.
Cool.
So
what year was that?
That was 1986.
Awesome.
So, we were still running DOS. We had this was a dual floppy system with a backlit LED, and it weighed about 12 pounds, and it was leading edge at the time. So, so that got me started, and I was very blessed, I would say, to have been involved in the formative years of the personal computer, and really a blessing, because it was just an amazing ride. I spent about 6 years at Zenith, and then I went and did my first startup, which was to design at the time the first sub 1 kilogram, 2.2 pound notebook that would run Windows. So Windows was just coming out. It was the early days of Windows. And so we did that. But what we ended up doing was we didn't sell it under our own brand. We ended up selling the product to Gateway. Okay. Some of you may remember Gateway as well. It was the cow-spotted computer company. And so through that relationship, I got to know Ted Waite, who was the CEO. I mean, long story short, he basically presented me with an opportunity to take a senior role within Gateway as part of that, which I had to make this decision, like, hey, do I continue on with my own startup, which was starting to do well, or do I jump over to this company that at the time was approaching $1 billion in sales, hadn't gone public yet, and I could kind of jumpstart a few years in the process, which I did, and was very blessed. It was a great ride. I ended up spending from 1999 to 2004. I was there. I ran a product development there as the chief technology officer, and that allowed me to design laptops and servers, and we eventually became, again, history won't remember it well, but we were in 2002 the #1 plasma TV company in the world. I did MP3 players and digital cameras. So, as a technologist and an engineer, it was just a phenomenal ride. And, really, it was hard for me in the time to imagine a better ride, because, we felt, and I think we really were, part of a revolution, and starting with the personal computer and bringing computers to people's homes and airplanes and things like that, and then later segueing into the internet and everything that the internet did. So that was a great ride. But I left in 2004, working in corporate America at the C-suite level is it's got its pros and its cons.
And I think probably people disproportionately see the pros, but don't actually realize some of the cons.
Yeah. I mean, they're at that level. So when you're talking about at the time now, you have a $9 billion company, 18,000 employees. And if you're I guess I don't, you could, was I the number 2 executive, the number 3, 4, 5 executive? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But in fact, that's part of the problem, is that the politics at that level get very difficult. Being a public company is very, very difficult. You know, the dream of the IPO probably is a rabbit hole we probably don't have time to do today, but being a public company is tough. It's a very, very tough road, and it's gotten tougher. And so I eventually left. Honestly, there was a change in CEOs. I didn't like him. He didn't like me. We'll be very frank about it.
There you go.
So
seems like the decision made itself then.
Yeah, the decision made itself. So I left. I started doing a technology incubator, and this was in South Dakota, by the way. So I'm living in South Dakota now, and in that era, there wasn't a lot going on in South Dakota, as you can imagine, but a lot of Gateway people, as Gateway was kind of losing some of its momentum, a lot of talented people looking for jobs that still wanted to live in South Dakota. So I started a technology incubator to kind of give outlets for these people to start companies. We could provide a little funding. We'd provide administrative services and mentoring and things like that. So I did that for quite a while. Like any incubator, some things worked, some things didn't. Several of the companies are still alive. But probably to what's more pertinent to the audience here is one day in 2017.
Can you bring your mic closer to you just a tiny bit? Is that possible?
Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's all good. One day in 2017.
So one day in 2017, I got a phone call, and in fact, it was kind of one of those late nights. I remember it very distinctly. It's late night, maybe like 9 p.m, and I get an unrecognized number on my phone, and it's from Seattle. I know it's from Seattle because it comes up Seattle, Washington, but that's all I know. And I don't want to answer it, as probably most people wouldn't. My wife, though, who's very instinctive, she's got a great inner thing. She said, "You need to answer that phone." Oh, okay. So I answered the phone. Yes, ma'am. So actually, that's Lola right there. That's Lola pointing to the laser eyes at the Bitcoin conference, right? Nice. That lady up there.
Oh, so that's a great backdrop, by the way. I love that.
Oh, thank you. And my compliments to whatever artist made that. That's from a mural at the Miami Bitcoin conference in June.
Amazing.
So she said, answer it. I did. It turned out to be an old acquaintance from Gateway. Guy I hadn't talked to in a decade plus, but he said, "Hey, do you remember me?" I did. He said, "Hey, Bob, I would like you to design an Ethereum mining machine for me." And I said, "Well, why can't you just go get one?" And I should say, I had cursory exposure to cryptocurrency through that, had no investments in it.
But you knew what it was.
I knew what it was. And also, I guess I fast forwarded. In school, I also studied economics, interestingly. And I had kept up with that, kind of in the background of all that other stuff going on, was an interest and continual education in economics. And I was from the Austrian School of thought, by the way, as well.
Beautiful.
So you probably can all see where this is going.
Yeah, it's like the perfect storm.
Yeah. Well, I like to say, I like to say Bitcoin is when Austrian economics and technology had a baby. That's, that's what Bitcoin is.
Yeah.
And
that resonates with me big time.
And so, anyway, I answered the call and I said, "Hey, why can't you just go buy one from Dell or HP or wherever?" I didn't really understand. He said, "No, they're all crap." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll go do some research." And so there I am at, 9:30 at night, I'm starting to Google around and look, and sure shit, he's right. There really is not a quality built, in that case, Ethereum mining machine, so he was looking specifically for that, a GPU miner. Everything out there was essentially, home built by hobbyists, guys in strip malls and garages. And no disrespect to anybody that's a hobbyist out there, but the truth of the matter is, I spent my career as a guy who designs computers. And as you might, those of you who are involved, there were a lot of things like open air rigs, which are horrible. You can't control airflow and heat management. And so I was looking at these things going, oh my God, there really is an opportunity. There was a second problem, which was NVIDIA chip shortage, where you basically had to either be using NVIDIA or ATI products, right, in order to get those. But a little piece of history, Gateway was the first company to design NVIDIA silicon on a motherboard. So the first major personal computer manufacturer. So when they were tiny and nothing. And so myself and my good friend and who's now the president of Barefoot Mining, his name's Keith Thomas. We started talking the following morning. We called our old NVIDIA contacts, said, hey, if we built some of these, would you guys give us some chips? And nice. They knew us, they trusted us, and they said, yes, they would. So I called them back, and this guy had wanted several hundred of these GPU mining machines. So I said, okay.
Okay. So he just didn't want like one machine. He wanted
several hundred. He wanted to put,
okay.
Yeah. So, so I said, okay, we'll build them for you. And so really in less than 24 hours, we opened a new business, which that business became a company called Divi Systems, which still exists today. And
sister company to Barefoot Mining.
To Barefoot Mining. And the role of Divi Systems is really as that system. So we still, to this day, if you want an Ethereum mining machine, we'll make it for you. We have our own designs and we'll still make them. We still sell some of them. It's not like flying off the doors, but there's still people out there that want Ethereum mining equipment.
Sure.
And so we designed it for them. And then we started reaching out to other people and said, hey, we're building this for this other purpose. Would you like one? And a lot of people started to say yes. And these are smaller players. These are guys that wanted 10 or 2 or 12 or, like that sort of thing.
Sure.
But a lot of them said, yes, I would like one. I'd like to get some Ethereum, really was what they were saying. But I don't want to manage them. Will you manage them for me? So we ended up having to start a second company. That's where Barefoot Mining came in to be the hosting arm. So, it was initially an enabling function to help us sell more computers. Right. And we were very fiat mindset at the time, which is we were selling these computers. I guess it's about 4.5 years ago now. We're selling these computers to people and making pretty good money, and just being happy with that in the first couple months. And then very quickly, we started to see the output coming from the machines, and we're pretty impressed by it. So we started saying, well, let's take the profits from this venture on both the hosting side and the system sale side and start plowing it into equipment of our own and mining for ourselves. So we did that. And so, now we basically have, we have 2 entities performing, I would say, 3 functions. One was the system design, manufacture and distribution. And then the other one doing hosting and mining for ourselves. At that point,
along with hosting, is that also sort of taking care of figuring out where to get where to plug them in, right? Like where to get the energy to actually fuel these things. I guess that's part of the hosting offering, because that's also like a pretty significant problem to solve, especially now. I don't know how it was in the early days, but with the competition now.
Well, it was hard. It was not that different. And I mean, at the time we were only looking for, we need a couple hundred kilowatts here and a couple hundred kilowatts there. So not massive amounts, but meaningful amounts. And what we ended up doing, I kind of ended up going full circle. So Gateway, which used to have its corporate headquarters in South Dakota, their data center was open. So we ended up leasing that data center. And we can get into this a little more, then finding out it was completely inappropriate for doing what we were trying to do. We could talk about some of if you want to go down a little technical avenue.
Well, I'd like to have you onto our Hash Power. So Hash Power is going to be our other show, which is fully and wholly dedicated to mining.
Okay.
And really like telling the story, because I think people fundamentally don't understand how important mining is. And like the way I see it is it's a humanitarian service that miners provide. They are essentially protecting all of our privacy rights. And so I wanted to make sure, I'm very curious about mining in terms of hearing the story of mining companies. So I'd love to have you back at some point on on hash power to go deep into the mining stuff. But I think today we'll stick more high level. But I really I'd like you to continue telling your story, because I find this very interesting, the journey that you took. And even just the tiniest things, like your wife saying answer that, is like the impetus to this whole thing happening. So maybe continue that story. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And she, 4.5 years later, she reminds me of that regularly, by the way.
There you go.
It
was Lola, right?
Yes.
Thanks, Lola. Thanks, Lola, for getting involved in Bitcoin.
Yep.
The world's better because of that.
We all owe Lola a lot of gratitude.
Amazing.
So, but anyway, we solved that problem. We find a hosting facility, and we're hosting. We were fortunate to get, this is a traditional data center, grid-based power. We did have a good rate. I guess I'll show you, like a sub 5 cent per kilowatt hour rate. We're just fortunate to live in the right area where we could get a competitive rate, and it allowed us to do this competitively. But now I'm we're now into 2018, maybe the early to middle part of 2018, and I'm spiraling into the rabbit hole, and I'm starting to realize what I've actually got myself into. Because as you said, I am here more. When I say here, I mean in the space, doing what I'm doing more for what it stands for than for the money. And I'm not saying I'm not somewhat motivated by financial pieces.
Of course, but they're interconnected. This is the beauty of the game theory of Bitcoin. It's like your values can align financially with the incentive to hold something that's increasing in values, despite you doing it because of the core values that it stands for. And that's kind of that they're like enmeshed so tightly that it actually doesn't matter, because they're together. Exactly. And my perspective, so I mentioned, I was an Austrian guy, first of all. And so, I started to learn first about Ethereum and what it was, but that logically leads me to what's Bitcoin and what is it. Yep. And as I started to peel back that onion, these light bulbs are going off every layer, both from an economic standpoint and as a technologist. The elegance and beauty of what Satoshi created is just jaw-dropping. Yeah. And a very interesting little side note, when I was at Gateway, one of the projects that I led was, history may not remember this well, but Gateway had a chain of over 400 retail stores across the country that predated the Apple stores. And so we had, every store had about 30 computers, and they were the highest performance computers available, because we wanted people to come into the stores and start to touch them and play with them and have a great experience as they were doing that. Yep. But I did some studies and, realized that the usage of them was like 0.02%. Like they were sitting there idle. Right. So I said, well, there's got to be a way for us to harness this power. And so we had a skunkworks project that ended up coming to light that I've really never talked about publicly before, but that's that I created a grid network behind it. We worked with organizations like the American Diabetes Association, and we allowed them to plug into, because collectively in the right application, this was supercomputing power. Right. At the time, because it was, 400 plus computers that could work and solve a problem. So I guess the reason I give you that is what Satoshi was trying to accomplish with mining was not unlike what I was trying to accomplish back in the day. And we did, like I said, we did work for American Diabetes Association, Kaiser Permanente Health Network. We did some work with SETI and some scientific organizations. We did some private financial modeling. And so people could just kind of come in and buy hours essentially on our supercomputer. Wow.
But
yeah, because in aggregate, I mean, if you have that's a lot of computing power, right? Like you said,
right.
individually, those computers they're the higher power personal computers, but in aggregate, that's like a shitload of computing power that you can point in some direction if you
Right.
can make those connections.
Yep. And that's what we did. And if in certain applications at the time, this would have been like 1999, 2000, in aggregate, was a top 20 supercomputer in the world that you could access. So anyway, these light bulbs are going off for me then as I'm reading the white paper, I'm seeing what Satoshi's done. And so I've got on the technical side, all these light bulbs going off. And then as I'm learning about absolute scarcity and the difficulty adjustment and the way all those mechanisms work and the beauty of that, it was just jaw dropping. And so the other thing I'll note that was a big part of my journey is Lola, who we've talked about a couple of times already. Lola's originally from the Philippines, and she was born in 1970 under the Marcos regime. Those of you who don't know that, the Marcos was a dictator who ran the Philippines for about 25 years. And so she's born in 1970 under martial law, and the country did not get out of martial law until 1986. Wow. And so she essentially spent her entire childhood living in a country under martial law. And
how do you define martial law? It's basically like police run everything, tell you what to do.
Constitution is suspended. You basically are at the discretion of the police state, and you can be held in prison.
So you have no rights, basically.
You basically have no rights. And by that, I'm not saying, she was abused and beaten up or anything like that.
Sure. But it builds context around what that means.
Yeah. Very restricted environment. And I also, my background, at Gateway allowed me to travel the whole world. And I saw poverty all over the world. I saw just, the kind of poverty that lets you go back to your hotel room and you cry because you realize there's so many people living in conditions that here in America, when you see a poor person, you see the homeless guy on the street. Lola reminds me of this. She'll often say, you see the guy on the corner with the shopping cart, and you think of him as down and out and destitute. And what Lola will say was, that guy has more in his shopping cart than half of the people in my country have.
Wow. Yeah.
And the statistics, I'm just talking Philippines, but we could pick several other countries. 50% of the people live on less than $2 a day. It's a pretty tough go. So why does that happen? What's the root cause of that? And I'm of the opinion, the strong opinion, that it is the mismanagement of the global monetary system that is at the root of this. That stuff is much less likely to happen, would affect many fewer people if money was fair and equitabable.
Yeah, so when that's a symptom of failed money.
Yes. And so I think, your viewers or listeners may be very first world oriented, US oriented. I hope there's people from around the world, but
well, we're just starting this journey out. So kind of we're determining what the audience is based on what we create. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
But if you are fortunate to be, sitting in a nice home with a roof over your head and, all these, you live in a place where, like in America, when did you last time you read about somebody dying of starvation? When was the last time?
We're dying from the opposite. We're dying because we eat too much. And that's like totally
skews
our perspective of what the world is actually like in reality outside of our own experience. Right.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you a healthcare example. Something, Lola and I were married almost exactly 12 years ago. And we got married in the Philippines. We went into the healthcare, the government run healthcare office to get our blood tests and kind of the stuff you have to do before you get married. I noticed on the other side of the room, there was a man, and he was upset. And he was speaking with a nurse who was also upset. And my wife was filling out some paperwork. I said, hey, something's going on over there, but I didn't understand the language well enough to figure it out. And she's also an RN. But anyway, she walked over there and she came back and she was upset. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, the guy had been bitten by a rabid dog. He's in the middle of the series of shots you have to get to treat that. I don't know, it's 7 shots or 10 shots. I can't remember the series. He's only had a couple, but he doesn't have the money to pay for the rest of the shots. And the nurse has the medicine there to fix him, but she's not authorized to give it to him. And so we obviously then we found out how much it was, and it was like $75 for the whole rest of the treatment. Like we paid, like there's no way we're going to walk out of that room leaving a guy to die of rabies, right. And $75 fixes it. So we paid it, but that's the kind of thing that I think people in first world countries would take for granted, because you're not going to get denied that in any, if you're in an emergency room, you're going to get taken care of in a almost every European country and Western country in the world.
The standard is different.
Yeah, the standard's different. So
wow.
So anyway, the reason that I have so much passion for Bitcoin is I believe Bitcoin fixes this. And, you know, we have that acronym, Bitcoin fixes this. Well, it does fix a lot of things. And what it does is it defeats tyrants. It defeats dictators. It defeats equity gaps or income gaps and wealth gaps. It gives everybody a fair chance.
And it does so peacefully. That's a really important element of this.
Yeah.
That people I think don't understand.
And so, you know, as a guy in his late 50s, I go, well, what can I give to my grandkids? What can I give to the world? And you know, to be part of this and this revolution is, I think, the greatest gift you could get, because I believe a lot of problems that get masked as oppression, discrimination, prejudice, those sort of things are really largely masking economic issues.
Yep.
And that I'm not saying racism doesn't exist or you know, gender inequalities, or that they do exist to some level, but I think
it's not the existence. It's the we always focus on their existence, but we don't focus enough, I find, on actually solutions. Like we state the obvious. We do not go deep enough into the nuance to understand what is the root cause and what are the solutions that we can apply there. Because if you apply solutions at the symptom level, you actually don't get rid of the problem. And I think, like, my background is in health. So I led a health network. I still do, but I'll be kind of unwinding that by the end of this year. And, you know, one of the things we talk about, I'm formally trained as a physical therapist. I stopped practicing physio because I wanted to start practicing health. Mm-hmm. And ironically enough, I had to actually unlearn most of what I learned in my university degrees to then start to learn health through experience and conversations and experimentation. And, you know, this whole notion that one of the big final threads for me unwinding my role as the leader of that network to moving over into putting my energy into Bitcoin was this sort of realization that I'm spending all this energy and time and creative juices to try and figure out how to convince people that are the luckiest people on earth, people that live in North America, to take care of themselves. Yeah. And I battle with this fact of, like, why do I have to convince people to take care of themselves? They don't want to be diseased. They don't want to be sick. They partially know kind of what they need to do, but they're unable to do it because there's so much friction in our world, and everything is engineered around disease, right? To the point where I've even stopped saying healthcare system, because it's similar. And I live in Canada. It's similar in the States. It's like we have a sick care system that revolves around taking care of sick people enough that they can continue to survive, but not escape their sickness. And like, I'm not taught, and I know friends that went through medical school, we're not taught about health. And, you know, this notion that I tried to gain this like clear mental model of, like, what's the hierarchy of problems, right? We're like, what are the biggest problems and what is the hierarchy through which one causes the other? Because, like, I got to get to the bottom of that hierarchy, and that's probably where I should spend my energy. And the way I started to look at it was from superficial to deep. It was health was superficial. It's like the problem we all see. Under that, there's an education problem. Kids aren't learning health in school. That's actually the chief source of the health problem, in my opinion, because it's all based on education of how to take responsibility for your health. Under that is a governance problem. So the people we put in power are clearly not fixing the education problem. So they're holding the bag with the problem. And underneath that is the money problem, because money determines the governance, determines education, determines health. So it's like, well, I've been in Bitcoin since 2014 from a personal standpoint of being fascinated by this thing. And now I have a reason to devote my energy to it, because it's actually solving the health problem needs to happen by solving the money problem, because it's the underlying structure. And it seems like I went through kind of a similar process of trying to zoom out a little bit and see things. And that's what gives me meaning for being in this space. And it sounds like it's similar to you, because one of the questions I was going to ask was, you're in the business of mining Bitcoin, but what meaning does mining Bitcoin carry for you personally, such that you're doing it? Because a common thread I see is like most people aren't doing this work in the Bitcoin space because of money. Money is, like we talked about before, it just so happens that it comes along with it. As the money you hold gets stronger, you start to get more relative wealth compared to others. But at the same time, it's like, that's not why. And that seems to be a big reason people love what they do, is because they have a deeper meaning than just financial or personal gain. And it's like the sense of, we're a big family trying to change the world. And that sounds sensational, but that's kind of like, that's what it is.
Yeah. That's a great story, by the way. And I love it, because I think you like I said, you've broken it down. You get that root level, and you find that at the root level of so many things, there's money.
Yeah.
And money, not so much in the sense of not having enough money, but the way money works, the way money is distributed, who's in control of the money. Those are the fundamental things. And I didn't come at it as much from the health perspective, but I absolutely see how you got there. And I came at it from looking at life in second and third world countries and oppression, some here too, of course, but it's a lot easier to see through the eyes of somebody living in a country that's economically disadvantaged or politically in turmoil. It's a lot easier to see how it changes their life. And I gave a speech this last weekend at a private gathering to a group of investors, high net worth people. And I started my speech by basically saying, hey, can you guys guess what country has the highest percentage penetration of cryptocurrency adoption? And the answer is Nigeria. Now, Venezuela would probably beat it, but they couldn't get the survey. But, you have Venezuela, Vietnam, Philippines, Turkey, you have Lebanon. That's the top of the list. The bottom of the list is the US, Japan, Germany. So you see this inverted chart. The people in the most distress see the value the most.
It's by necessity. Like the bottom of that list is what we think of most, but like we're choosing to get into Bitcoin. I think eventually, with the way the current fiat system is designed, being self-terminating, like everyone has to eventually, but a lot of those places aren't doing it because it's trendy or because they want to get rich. They're literally doing it by necessity, because their survival and supporting their families depends on them having a vehicle to store their energy that's reliable. And, like one thing, as I started to learn about money and sort of the flaws of the money that we currently use, it's actually gotten rid of a lot of the anger that I had towards individuals, right? Like you look at 2008 and you start to dive into that and you're like, what the fuck happened there? Like, how is there no accountability? How could these people do that? And when you look at it from like a zoomed out perspective, it's kind of like, okay, well, if money's broken, then the game theory of money's broken. And it's not necessarily that we have bad actors, but we have people that are simply gravitating towards the incentive structure of the system that's designed. If the incentive structure is messed up, people are going to do messed up things, not because they're bad people, because they're simply abiding by the game theory of this game that has gotten off track, and that we now have another option to play the game of money. We now have a new option. Finally, we have choice. And yeah, it's just gotten rid of like a lot of bad vibes of just constantly being like, it's so sad that there's bad people in this world that are ripping everyone off, like personalizing the gains and socializing the losses at the expense of everyone. And no one seems to be really talking about it, because it's such a deeply rooted problem in like our financial illiteracy prevents us from actually holding people accountable. And knowing that it's just a bad game and we have a better game now makes me super happy, and released a lot of like the, I don't know, resentment for how crazy things have gotten.
Yeah, well, you set me off on a whole bunch of different thoughts there.
That's right. Let's follow.
One was I specifically, so on Twitter, my name is Boomer BTC.
Love that name. That's a great one.
You. And I chose it for a reason, because I certainly recognize that the movement is centered on younger generations, and I do feel there's a lot of animosity toward my generation, and I get it, but we and there were some, like you said, there were misguided people, maybe with misguided incentives. There were some bad people, and still are. There are in every layer. We'll be happy to talk about a few of those people here shortly, if you'd like.
Sure.
But we didn't have a realization. Remember, the world changed in 1971, right? And so this fiat experiment that we're in, we're childs of that. That was really born almost of the previous generation. We inherited it. We don't know what the hell we got.
Yep.
We're trying to figure out our way through it. And I will say, at least my generation, we did bring the personal computer and the cell phone and the internet and those sort of things on that information freedom vector. But I chose my name because I wanted at least the younger generations to know there was somebody in this generation, in my generation, that cared, hopefully that they believe gets it, and that is fighting for the same stuff, that I see it, I'm fighting for it. I also think it's interesting, go back to the thing you talked about with health, and you talked about kind of underneath the first layer, you start getting into education. Well, talk about money. We don't teach really any finance and personal responsibility financially in their schools.
Yep.
There are very few at the higher levels in high schools and colleges, universities around the world. There's very little openness to exploring non-Keynesian schools of thought. And that's what I got, and they keep pounding that in.
Right.
And it's hard to unlearn. As you said, you went through your journey, it's hard to unlearn.
Yeah.
So
especially when you paid a shitload of money to get the paper that says the stuff, and then you realize all that stuff isn't the right stuff to know. It seems like the more expensive your degree was, the more challenging it is to admit that you need to unlearn that.
Yeah. And Keynesian thought, and I'm happy to debate anybody with it.
Well, how did you get out of that? So you said you're an Austrian guy. Like, how did that happen? Because that's like a salmon swimming upstream in a challenging ass stream.
Well, my interest in economics, started in my late teens and just reading. And I always was fascinated by macroeconomic thought. I mean, that was microeconomics never really interested me much, but kind of this whole thing about, major movements of money and how trade worked, how international economics worked, all that sort of stuff was just really, really interesting to me. And I got the same load of crap everybody else got in school.
Yep.
But then, so that's all I got at the university level. And then as I got older, I was traveling internationally, and I started doing business internationally, sometimes in big numbers, and I started to kind of see, how things worked. I started to see like real world disparities. Like what I learned was, you ever heard of the Big Mac Index?
No.
Okay. So it's an old school way. It's the Big Mac Index was, I believe it was The Economist magazine came up with this concept in the 80s. And the idea was that a Big Mac is a product built consistently around the world. And I can attest to this. I've probably eaten a Big Mac in probably 3 dozen different countries, maybe more. Okay. And you have the same experience, right? They have an amazing ability to replicate the same thing in every country.
Right.
So if I was in the US, let's say I'm about to board the plane, say I'm going to get some McDonald's before I go to Japan, and I buy one for $5, and then I fly to Japan and I get on the other end, I go, well, I'm hungry again, I want to buy one, but after going through the exchange process, it's the equivalent of $7. You start seeing a money issue.
So they're
right?
using Big Macs as a unit of account to like.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I learned by my own version used to be a can of Coke, that how much a Coke was. And then I learned about the Big Mac index later. I want to give credit to, I'm pretty sure it's The Economist. Cool. And they track it to this day. I believe they still track it, and you can see what the price is of a Big Mac. And so it's a great way of saying, how does this happen? But the more you think about it, then you go, well, why should there be any real difference? I mean, right. It doesn't really make sense. It's the same product. The difference isn't the Big Mac. The difference is the money. And so that, I'm not saying this was an overnight epiphany. Like, this is an iterative kind of process. And so ultimately that, and a couple other reasons, led me into, well, I found Hayek and Rothbard and the Mises Institute and, these other things that led me into that. And so, well before Bitcoin, though, well before I found about Bitcoin,
the same curiosity that probably led you there, and the underlying notion that it's okay to question, like you've been fed all this stuff. It's okay to be curious and question the validity of that, because when you get these pokes from your experience saying, well, that doesn't align with the way I was taught. Right. There must be something there. And I think when the world, your perception of the world and your experience of the world don't align, you have like this decision tree, and you have two choices. Either my perception was false, or what I know is false. And it's way easier to say, I'm being fooled, this is not real, what I learned is real, than it is to say, well, shit, everything I learned is turning out to not actually be as true in reality. Maybe I should investigate. And I think that mindset that brought you to maybe look into Austrian is probably the same mindset that brings people to look into Bitcoin, because it's super uncomfortable when you first get the first hint to say, I think money is messed up the way it's done. And you have to get over that discomfort and I think the biggest thing that gets people over it, and for me it did, was curiosity. It's like, well, even if this turns out to be something random or irrelevant, like at least I should look into it because it seems interesting. And I think that's beautiful. It's like this, it's almost like a core value of Bitcoiners to be open-minded and looking and understanding that as time passes, humans learn and they get better. And back to your thing about boomers, it's like, that was just the world that came about through that generation was simply the best we knew at that point. And there's no blame. Yeah. But what I think I find very frustrating is people that are ignorant towards the changes happening and how important those changes are to happen, because they don't want to put in the work to like actually taking some responsibility and understanding it. And so I think there's no blame on the boot. Like I have this conversation with my parents all the time, and it's not necessarily that you put us in this mess. Like that was just the path that we took. And inevitably there's these inversions like there's collapses of institutions that no longer serve us, and the emergence of new ones or new ways of doing things. And it's how you navigate that that matters, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And change is hard.
Yep.
It's very hard. My job as a technologist, and I think this helped me too, was, I had to look out to see, what was the future of technology, but then how would society respond to it? That was at the 50,000 foot level. That was my job. And I remember doing things like right around the turn of the century, flying to Korea, because this is an important thing for those of us in the West. It used to be that all technological change started here and then flowed out to the rest of the world. And there was a change around that time period, and I could just start to see it. And I flew to Korea to spend about a week there, because what was changing was they had brought broadband to the home ahead of everybody. So South Korea, was way ahead, where we're still flirting with dial-ups and flaky DSL lines. They had fiber to the home and they're blasting it. And what changed was we saw things like they had online gaming exploding. Back then, the gaming world was primarily, you played with your buddy who was sitting next to you. You didn't play,
with the world.
With the world. And
Right.
They were playing with the world, or at least within their country. They had all these people playing with them. And it got to the point that even 20 years ago, they already had TV stations dedicated to online gaming. And the best gamers in the world were celebrities in the country. They were getting endorsement deals. And I had to go there to say, why is this happening? What's going on? And, am I missing something sitting here in the US? Same thing with texting. I remember it's partly what brought me into that part of the world, ultimately meeting my wife. But I might have the year wrong, so please forgive me. But let's say roughly 2000, 2001, the average person in the US had like 1.2 texts per day. And in the Philippines, it was like 23. So like, well, okay, what's happening here? What am I missing? I don't understand it. Why? Because again, this is a boomer mindset a little bit, but at least I recognize it. Like, why don't they just pick up and call these? Why aren't they picking up and calling each other? What's the social dynamic that's changing?
Once again, curiosity. It's like you wanted to approach it, right?
Yes. Right. And so, I went over there and I saw what was happening, and I saw both from a functional standpoint why it was happening, and it was also an economic thing, because, for them, a penny a text or 5 cents a text or whatever it was at the time was an astronomical number. And I didn't fathom that people would change their behavior over a few pennies or a few nickels. But like, nobody made phone calls, everybody texted. So those sort of things, though, is what I'm saying is, it even goes back to, revolution, whether that's social, political, financial, technological, it can erupt almost anywhere in the world now. And those of us that, again, I think Western people in general are very guilty of this, of thinking the world centers around us and that we lead things and all that. That's not true. And I think Satoshi had that vision. Well, I hate saying that Satoshi's vision. I shouldn't really even.
That's okay.
That's
I know
been
what
bastardized.
You mean. That was his idea.
Yeah, that was his idea, and I think he got that. And I think he from reading, his words, that the importance of this was much bigger than the Western world and the Western financial system. I think he got that. And
I think I think that's why so few people in the Western world really know about this, except for the keen group of people who are interested or have come across this serendipitously. Like, if it wasn't for basically a computer nerd patient of mine in the early days of physio talking about Bitcoin, I would not have known about it. Mm-hmm. And he was persistent. I'm very thankful for that person. Yeah. And I think it's because we don't have a need, right? Like, I had this discussion with my parents. Like, if you don't know, you have access to, you can buy a stock, you have relatively sound money. If you really don't understand how the money works, like you can buy things with your Visa card, you have a bank account, you can access, you're not getting robbed. There doesn't seem to be a problem that needs to be solved. And the problem is our financial literacy level is so low. We don't even see the problems that are actually there, but are like sneaky problems like money printing. But in the Western world, you have these places where they essentially leapfrog technological, like almost innovation periods, right? Like, if you live in the Amazon, you probably never had a landline and will never have a landline, but because we can drop a cell tower with a solar panel, you have a cell phone. So you literally skip the whole initial phase of phones and go straight to like a Nokia phone which now turns into a bank, which is even crazier. And so it's just cool. Like I love listening to Andreas Antonopoulos talk about this, how we basically have these nations that are leapfrogging in technology, skipping the middle old stuff and going straight to the stuff that's available now, because things are just moving so fast. There's no, like, you can literally just jump in at a really far ahead stage without going through the iterative process like we did in North America. And I think it's just most people don't know that Bitcoin solves a problem they have because they don't even know the problem exists yet.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things you're right that when I speak, it depends on the group. But when I tell them money is broken, and that money enslaves them, and things like that, sometimes you just get this either deer in the headlights look, or a hostility even.
Yeah.
I've faced that before too. Like,
yeah,
oh, you're not, you're the whole Bitcoin's for criminals and all that. Some people that have been indoctrinated already that way. But as you said, money, the fiat money, whether that's the American dollar, Canadian dollar, whatever, the way that the money supply expands and the way that inflation works in the system, and I call it death by paper cut. And so when you're getting a paper cut every day, you kind of don't notice it, but eventually you get enough paper cuts.
It adds up.
It hurts. You're going to get an infection. It's going to go septic and you're going to die. But you don't feel it. And so sometimes I'll say about people, they'll say, well, Bitcoin, it's too volatile. I'll say, well, you know what? When you measure it in short windows, I'll grant you volatility. Although the measuring stick you're using is a fiat system, which in and of itself is a terrible measuring stick.
It's the fiat. It's the world that's volatile, not Bitcoin. Bitcoin's stable as shit.
I would say, yeah, it is. Or I'll use a different word, which is just predictable. That I'll say, that, Bitcoin, to play along, I'll say it's volatile in the short term, but it's predictable in the long term. And I'll say fiat is the opposite. Fiat is predictable in the short term, meaning if I can buy 2 tomatoes for $1 today, I probably can buy 2 tomatoes for $1 tomorrow.
Right.
But long term, it's not predictable. It's in fact, it's unknown. Sometimes I'll do this thing with groups and I'll pick somebody in the audience. I'll say, if I could promise you that 5 years from now you had $100 million, what would that mean for you? And the typical answer is, oh, I would, it would be such a blessing. I'd have financial freedom. I'd blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, the real answer is you don't know. You have no idea what $100 million means 5 years from now. So you are probably right. I don't think it's going to fall that far that fast, but you're probably right. But you can't say with certainty. On the other hand, if I told you,
and what if a car costs $1 million in 5 years?
Right. We really don't know.
Yeah.
But if on the other hand, if I say, you don't even know what percent of the money that represents. So even if I gave it to you today, you don't know how much 100 million represents. You have a concept of the present purchasing power, but you don't know how much of the world's wealth you have. On the other hand, if I say today or 5 years from now, you have 21 Bitcoin, well, you have 1/1,000,000th of all the Bitcoin that will ever exist.
Right.
And so that is predictable. That is stability. That is, and I think that's part of the beauty of the whole thing, and the beauty of absolute scarcity, which it would go back to some of the economic thought. Like, it breaks the economic books, right? Because all the economic books are written with the supply and demand curves, and supply goes up and price goes down, and vice versa, and you have all this. Well, what happens when supply is fixed?
Right.
And that's absolute scarcity. Difficult concept, very difficult concept for people to get.
And I think in the School of Coin show that we're doing, the first one was why we care about Bitcoin, right? Like personally, why myself and kind of the other person I'm creating the series with care about Bitcoin. Because we can't tell you why you should care about Bitcoin, but we can tell you reasons we care. And they're probably reasons that will resonate with you because they're common reasons for people in North America. Episode 2 was about Bitcoin culture. Like what, and I'd like to ask you a question about that after. I was like, how do you define Bitcoin culture? We're talking about culture and like elders and terminology, some of the cool, funky terms of Bitcoin. But the third episode is what is money? And then the fourth one is what is Bitcoin? And they're obviously going to be very high level, but that order is very important because it is impossible to understand a new monetary system without first understanding the previous monetary system and actually just understanding money from first principles. Because I want to get to a point where I don't even have to tell people why Bitcoin is good money. I want them to understand from first principles, well, what actually creates good money? What are the functions of money? What properties must be inherent in money in order for it to be a good, quote unquote, good form of money, a sound form of money? And then based on that, you can make your own judgment by comparing Bitcoin and fiat of what is good money. And based on that, you can decide where you want to store your wealth because you now have a choice. And in order to make an educated choice, you have to have an understanding. And I think the problem is no one knows money. No one understands money. Like when my 2-year-old nephew asks questions about money, many people can't answer them because they don't actually understand money. Like he's highlighting everyone's financial illiteracy and we just kind of shrug it off as like a silly 2-year-old question, but like those are great questions. And the fact that we don't know the answers is really, that should be a red flag. Because I heard someone make a great analogy of money once. It's like tires on a car. We're so close to tires or wheels because that technology is so deeply rooted and we're close to it every day, right? The wheels on your car are not worth really understanding deeply until you get a flat tire. And then it's really important and it's a really big problem. And the idea is like, we now have the ability to put unpoppable tires on our car so that we don't actually have to worry about the risk of our tires going flat. And with that said, we also know that the tires that are currently on there will go flat at some point because the fiat system, there's no way for it to go but to a place that is essentially a really big problem for everyone that's involved with that system. And the hope is like, how can we offer a life raft to people so they don't have to get to that point? Because there's going to be a lot of suffering. It's going to suck regardless. But if you can make it less sucky for people and give them at least some sort of, life raft accessible before they need it, then I think that's a really important point. And, when someone says, what is Bitcoin culture to you, Bob? What comes to mind when someone asks that question?
Well, I believe that. Oh, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. So I would say it's about openness. It's about freedom. It's about choice. It's interesting because I think I'm not trying to be political, but there's this mantra often of the progressives, especially here in the US, the progressive left. And I'm not a progressive, but the things that they say they want to fight, like oppression, like income inequality, opportunity inequality, like those sort of things. It's hard to argue against those, right? I mean, they're fundamental, but I think the issue is the how. And, there is a belief from the progressives, but even the conservatives feel the same way. Ultimately, the answer is always people and centralized power. And I think that those of us in the Bitcoin world, I don't know if you call this culture or not, but we believe in personal choice. We believe in personal freedom. We want trustless. We do not want to put faith and trust. Because like I'll say about money supplies, if you give control of a money supply to any organization, over time, they will prove themselves to be either inept or corrupt.
Right. History tells us that.
History tells us that. We can go back to Roman days. We know it, right? We can go back to coin clipping and all that other stuff. Every time that's happened, ultimately, it's, inept or corrupt or both. Okay. So it's a complete failure. And so, I believe Bitcoin culture, at least Bitcoin's philosophy, the root cause is like, we have to fix that. We have to remove that control. I know a lot of people have talked about it, the same in the open source world, that same feeling is there. And what's hard is, I think this is the hardest thing for us to overcome. This isn't your question exactly, is that we can't get from here to there without some rough water.
Yes.
And whenever there's rough water, people want a life raft. And so they look to these places that are saying, I'm the life raft.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of crypto life rafts.
Yeah.
That aren't actually, that don't float.
Right.
I guess.
Right. And they're just, they're temporary, they're fleeting, and they'll just suck everything out of you. And, we've become afraid. The Fed, the Fed and the central banks of the world, they're afraid because they're afraid of bad news. We keep digging a deeper and deeper hole because they're all afraid. Nobody wants to be the politician. Nobody wants to be the prime minister or the president or the Fed chairman or whatever on a downturn.
Yeah, no one wants to be on guard holding the bomb when it goes off. I mean, essentially is what it is. Yeah. The problem is that every time someone hands the bag off to someone else, they enhance the power of that bomb. They enhance the damage, I guess, and the amount of collateral damage that's going to be. And that's gone on for so long that it's an unpopular thing to say we need to suck up some really hard times. And, it really is. And the reason I ask about culture is like a big part of what we did at the Foot Collective with this health network was really largely based on culture. It's like, okay, every community inevitably forms its own culture. Whether you are actually helping to mold that culture or not, it's going to develop. So you should probably focus on and make sure that it's actually a culture that aligns with whatever your mission is. And what I find really curious and beautiful is that the culture of Bitcoin is almost a direct determinant of the protocol. It's like the things that are hard-coded into the protocol: honesty, transparency, trustless, permissionless, open, accepting. These are all essentially values that we all have signed on to indirectly by using the protocol. By being part of this network, we are signing on to the set of values. And the fact that it's hard-coded is beautiful because it cannot be, just like Bitcoin's immutable, its values in the protocol and the difficulty to change that protocol make it so that these hard-coded values in this community are immutable. And that makes me feel real good, because one of the shows we're doing is going to be called Coordination and Collective Influence. And I really think that like in 10 years, the entity that is the cyber community of Bitcoiners will have so much collective influence on decisions that get made even at the political and nation state level, that we really have to understand culture, because we have to work on it in order to keep it on the right track. And we have to ensure that culture maintains its integrity so that the narrative attacks are harder to do, right? If we're all kind, absolutely, and if we're all logical and rational and open and curious, it's really hard to fight that. It is. It doesn't, because it just flies off, right? Like when you're on the side of truth, you can feel real good, and you don't have to use, you don't have to have animosity for the existing system, because the calmness that you gain by knowing that your system is unstoppable and far superior makes it so that all of us Bitcoiners we will have, we don't like our PR is going to be great because we already align with these values. And I think it's really cool that they're hard coded.
Yeah, that's really well said. Very, very well said. I couldn't agree more. I think that as a community, we've weathered a lot. And
there's more to come.
I think, interestingly, I think it started right around the time I was getting involved, the block size wars were going on. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like that the Bitcoin culture and the Bitcoin community kind of kicked out the people that weren't true to those values.
It was like a cleansing.
It was almost, like a cleansing. Yeah. And I think it's great because we have wars ahead of us. Sure. And, the mining community is going to be attacked. Bitcoin itself is going to be attacked. yeah, there's a group, I call it the unholy trinity, that I think will continually bash us. And the first member of the unholy trinity, the first collective within the unholy trinity is obvious. It's the financial and government establishment. It's,
the most to lose.
Yeah. The Janet Yellen at the U.S. Treasury, Christine Lagarde at the ECB, even, guys like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and all that, who,
Hanky.
He'll give backhanded compliments, but he really hates it. I mean, you have all that sort of group, and that's group number one. Group number two is, I talked about the progressives before. I think the progressive movement, not just here in the U.S., but on a global basis, is very strongly centered around centralization. It's just my opinion. I respect others, that it's more about the centralization than it is about the things they're trying to solve.
Right.
I think the core group. And so those two are aligned. The third group,
which is a very shallow perspective also. Like it doesn't, when you lack context and all you're doing is trying to centralize things, thinking falsely that is what we need for optimal efficiency and coordination.
Right.
I think it's too shallow of a perspective to even warrant much meaning. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's a powerful group. It's got a lot of people behind it. It has a lot of money behind it. And it has a lot of people who are looking for a life raft, the thing we talked about before. A lot of people are really people that if they hear the Bitcoin cause and they really had somebody explain it to them and they could listen without the filters on, I think they would find it's what they want.
Yeah.
But this other group's a laugh draft. The third group, I think, is an interesting group, and it's maybe the scariest group. I'll call it the crypto group. So it's the XRPs are, what do they call it? The XRP army or whatever those guys are, and the alternative blockchains. I'm pretty close to a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm not to the point where I think every single other project is crap, but I believe a handful will survive and do something useful. Yep. But picking those is really difficult. And I believe any other project that is trying to be money is doing a disservice to the world. And so
I agree.
So what happens is these groups now start to work in a loose coordination. I don't think they've organized yet, but I expect them to organize.
Sure.
And so you'll hear a Janet Yellen make a comment about Bitcoin being inefficient, let's say.
Which is totally uninformed.
Yeah, just totally uninformed.
Janet. Do a tiny bit of research.
Yeah, and then you'll get a member of the XRP community, maybe even in a Ripple executive or somebody from that
jump on the bandwagon
group saying, well, proof of work is meaningless. We can solve this problem, and then the media picks up on that and calls them the crypto expert. Janet Yellen's position now supported by the crypto expert, and then the progressive group says, yes, you're going to boil the oceans as well, and you get this positive, in their world, this positive feedback loop of seemingly three disparate groups that I call the unholy trinity, working to, with a common goal, because what we stand for is a direct threat to the existence of each of them. And so,
yeah. And I mean, this whole, the bigger vision for the Bitcoin Stoa. A Stoa in ancient Greece was a place that was public domain. Anyone could go. People would have interesting conversations there. Philosophers would go there. Just people from the public, like noble people would go there. And it was just an uncensored place for public discourse where people could have dialogue, right? Like uncensored dialogue. And this whole notion that, we're going to have different shows. One of those shows is going to be Fudbusters. And the idea that this can be part of this is trying to bring back the ethos of rigorous journalism, right? I call it proof of work journalism, where a 90-minute podcast unpacking some piece of bullshit Janet Yellen said by giving it context and nuance and research is it has much more weight to it, right? It is rigorous. You're basically doing live journalism, running through the sequence of rational arguments of why what Janet Yellen said is bullshit. And here's why. And here's my proof of work so that you can criticize it and comment on it and contribute to it. And so, yeah, I think this whole idea of having some sort of coordination, building some sort of platform by the community for the community that is really hard to take down because, I don't know how that happens eventually, but, when it gets enough traction, that's the goal, to where it's our place for meaningful and well thought out rebuttal to some of the things that we see so that people can actually have a place where it's like, I don't have to believe that what they're saying is true, but I can follow their train of thought and actually determine whether that was a good logical path to follow and see that that is in fact bullshit and they just don't know what they're talking about. And these people have clearly done enough research to have meaningful contributions to discussing this. And but it's like a smile gets put on my face when, like I heard someone say the other day, when the first time China bans Bitcoin, it's serious. The second and third and every time after is essentially good marketing for Bitcoin saying that it's unbannable. And so this whole idea that like all these people in this unholy trinity can throw at us whatever they want. And sure, we might get injured and wounded and maybe slowed down.
Yeah.
But knowing that that's the limit of what they can do is just slow us down, literally.
Yeah.
And hurt the temporary narrative. It's like that makes me sleep real good at night. And we're and even like the hash rate rebound after China is a prime case study of the anti-fragility of Bitcoin, where it's got this impenetrable immune system that seems to take every problem that gets thrown at it and turn it into something good. And that, I don't know, that makes me feel really good. It makes me really happy. Like I still get pissed and triggered when I hear this nonsense getting sent around in the world that is just an attack on Bitcoin's narrative. And it seems to be absorbed by a lot of people. But at the same time, it doesn't take long for that to be dispelled. And then we just move on. And meanwhile, every 10 minutes, Bitcoin is showing that it's not dead. And that's a cool thing. And just to get back, because I'm like itching to hear the end of this story. So where you left off was you built these 100 mining machines. You started this business where you're now hosting and building machines. You got the server space from Gateway in their old warehouse, but you had to basically, it's like Tesla. They took a Lotus and they tried to turn it into a Tesla and realized they had to rebuild the whole car. It sounds like that kind of situation where it's like, oh, none of this actually works. So let's redo it. So going from there to where Barefoot Mining is today, because I do find what you do to be very interesting in that you're trying to empower anyone to get into the world of mining by allowing them to acquire and have machines run by professionals. So you eliminate a lot of the stuff that people could mess up, or a lot of the stuff that technically would prohibit me, for example, from getting into mining even at a small scale. And one thing I heard you say on a podcast was that Barefoot Mining is the dandelion of mining. And I thought, and I would, so I'd like to hear the end of that story, even if it's like the fast track version of to where you are today. And then number two, I'd love to hear what you meant by Barefoot Mining be the dandelion of mining. And then I have a last question for you about the future of mining. But yeah.
Sure. Okay, great. All right. So we're settling into this data center, and we're getting into mining. We're doing all Ethereum, but I'm going down into the rabbit hole and realize that I really don't want much Ethereum. So, but it's making money. It's doing okay.
Sure. Serving its purpose for now.
Yeah. So we end up realizing that for us and the clients, it's up to our clients. They make the individual choice on their machines, what they want to do. But we started finding mechanisms either to use services like NiceHash, which is a pool, which would take our Ethereum machines and use them, but pay us in Bitcoin. So we ended up turning our Ethereum machines into a Bitcoin source. And then, or we would just mine Ethereum if that was more profitable and then just convert it to Bitcoin. But the reality was I wanted Bitcoin, not, I wanted to be more pure. And so, we reached out, established a relationship with a company called Bitfury, which
they're in Europe,
largest,
right?
Excuse me?
Are they in Europe?
They're European based. Yeah, they're based in Amsterdam. Very large. So I think they're the largest shareholder in Hut 8 as well. So their mining arm is, they have big mining. And so they've got about 0.5 gigawatt of mining that they're doing for themselves. Cool. Through these relationships, but they have their own ASICs. So we reached out to them in the interest of brevity. So around in the middle of 2018, we signed a deal with them to become the U.S. distributor and service center for Bitfury. That gave us access to Bitcoin mining equipment. And now we could offer both Ethereum mining systems and Bitcoin mining systems to people. And we could start, shifting our attention toward Bitcoin. In that time frame, we had done this data center, which we still have. We still have the data center. We ended up kind of gutting it and starting over, but we're still in the old Gateway data center. I guess that may be a story for another day. We then put an installation in a warehouse in Nebraska, more traditional, so a traditional kind of early mining solution, grid-based, just move a lot of air.
Yep.
But then I started to think at a bigger scale. By bigger scale, I don't mean more megawatts. I mean, think about this whole thing at a macro level.
Right.
And I saw a few things happening in the mining industry, and this was before the China ban. Right now, we're back probably now we're into maybe early 2019, and I started to be concerned. One, because I saw these attacks. The attacks were starting. The boil the oceans, the criminal, the whole thing, and so I started worrying about, one, my ability to continue mining, and two, what does it mean for the network?
Right.
And so I realized that whenever I went on the grid to do my mining, I was adding an exposure point. So even if it was, I'm going to throw the green part out. Regardless of what the source was, even if it was, let's say, a pure hydro source, which is actually both my Nebraska and South Dakota locations are on the Missouri River, and the energy we get is all hydro. Okay, so but I'm buying it through a third party, a utility company, and that started to worry me because I saw it as an attack vector that the utility company could decide whether or not they wanted me as a customer or not. In that area of the country, unlikely that they would shut me down, but could attacks.
And you're a paying customer. I mean, it would be into their disincentive to eliminate a paying customer that you probably had a good relationship with them. Although you're right, that could, if it's a choke point, let's call it, where if
it's just a theoretical, but there are even things outside of their control, like, legislative changes at either the state or especially the federal level, where taxation or surcharges or, different attack points were there, financial, to say, well, okay, there's a carbon tax, there's a this, there's a that. Right. I strongly object to any politicalization of energy usage. I mean, I think it's absolutely ludicrous. And for instance, I've done the math, and global consumption of power for TVs is greater than the Bitcoin network.
Sure. Drying machines.
There's
put your clothes on a clothesline.
Of things, and but regardless, I'll stay on track. So I said, well, this worries me. So first, for my company, I need to start pursuing off-grid solutions where I control the energy source and the ability to tax it, surcharge it, shut it off, is greatly reduced. Number one. Number two, I can control the cost,
Right.
as well. So just from running my business, that started to make sense for me. But then a second thing was going on within the industry, which is logical. And I'm in no way critical of it, but the bigger companies are getting bigger. You have Riot and Marathon and Foundry. And, I know people at all those companies. I'm friends with many of them. I applaud what they do. So I hope nobody takes this in any way, a negative way. But their direction is all scale based. Okay. 50 megawatts here, 100 megawatts here, 500 megawatts there. Now that China has shut down, almost all that activity is occurring in North America, US and Canada. Vast majority of it's occurring.
Yep.
And that worries me, because what I see is that I see a direction where if, as a community, we turn over all mining to them, their businesses will gravitate toward, let's say, a few dozen really large sites around the world. And that becomes a major issue. And almost all of them grid-based too. So they're doing great things. There are groups, Core Scientific, down in Texas, and they work with the grid, and they, if the grid needs power, they'll shut down and turn the power over to the grid. And it's all beautiful stuff, and it provides grid stability. But it also, if we do not do something else, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Because it could be anything from a government shutting it down to terrorist attacks to other things. If we allow just a handful of sites to control the bandwidth, we have a problem. So I believe, and this is where the dandelion comes in, that we need, in addition to that, we need a network that's full of dandelions. Dandelions being little sites, 300 kilowatts here, 500 kilowatts there, 2 megawatts there, 5 megawatts there, scattered everywhere, off grid as often as possible, and making the network almost indestructible.
Yeah.
And because I think we're moving toward this one direction, and so my goal with Barefoot Mining is to be the dandelion guy, to be the guy that's out there making all these little sites. And so
I love that. That's very powerful. And that's a good place to lead into the next question I had, was like, you lived through and played an active role in this sort of revolution of the personal computer, where it went from massive companies that had big budgets to house these massive mainframes, which were then a computer, to this miniaturization and this increase in affordability. So now everyone could have a computer, everyone could plug in the internet, everyone could have this tool, which was formerly reserved for a select few. And I can't help but think sometimes that this whole notion of mining becoming more and more accessible at a small scale, and this parallel, whereas like, is the personal mining rig going to be the PC revolution 2.0, where now people will have the ability, like, I don't even know the specifics of whether Moore's law is still in action when it comes to ASICs. This whole idea yeah. Okay. Yeah. Where things get smaller, things get better,
slowing down,
more energy efficient. When it reaches a certain point in both Bitcoin adoption and awareness, and also technological adoption in the ASICs, you got Blockstream starting to remove some of the dependence on China in terms of manufacturing ASICs. And you have these probably different companies that are going to be coming up. I would find it hard to believe that in the next decade, you don't see companies like Apple looking, or at least inquiring into making some of the hardware things, if they understand how really important this thing is. But I guess what I'm asking is, do you see a future potential of home Bitcoin mining being almost an equally powerful revolution as the PC revolution was to put computers in people's hands?
I think combined with the nodes, I think we need the nodes as well to explode. So I think I'm going to lump those two together, which is actually how it started. Ironically, I think there could be a full circle thing, right? So when Satoshi started, we have nodes and miners were synonymous and kind of broke apart. So I think these big installations are going to be there, but I think, to your point, I believe that ultimately we'll have this massive network of hundreds of millions of devices that can act as a backbone into the mining that makes it indestructible. And they may be roughly economically neutral. I think we'll reach that point. So mining,
it's more of a responsibility than a financial business.
Yes. But I will, I'll give me 1 sec here. So this right here, it's kind of heavy. This is called the Francis turbine, and properly connected in a stream, in a creek, that sort of thing. This can generate 30 to 40 kilowatts with the right, put that little device connected to the right generator. And so, anywhere in the world that water flows, you can get something like this and you can generate it. So I think things like this become.
That's a cool artifact, by the way, to have that there.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of items that inspire you, and just having that in my office, if I was you, I'd be like, that's a good reminder.
Yeah. It weighs about 12 pounds.
It looks beefy.
It's solid brass. It was a gift, by the way, from a guy named Danny Moody. Danny's a legend in the hydro space, and he helped us with our latest installation in South Carolina.
Cool.
And he built that.
Yeah, this whole notion of tapping into nature's batteries that are not currently getting tapped into, and that are would in effect create stranded energy. We're going to do a whole episode about energy in School of Coin, and just talking about how Bitcoin makes use of stranded energy and can actually, it used to be that you would find where you can create energy and then transport it to a city that needed to use that energy.
Right.
And the cool thing now is that once you take out the transportation costs and overhead of transporting energy, and you can Bitcoin is essentially the ultimate battery for energy, where you can instantly convert it into a form of storage, monetary storage. And the whole notion that there's stranded energy, there's energy opportunities everywhere. And like in Africa, where there's massive water flows, you could set up a mining operation there and have a city grow around that, instead of having to pull that energy to a city. And I think just the human creativity is what makes me most optimistic about Bitcoin and securing the network, when you blend human creativity with accessible technology and an understanding of how important this thing is, and the necessity that places like Nigeria will have for this because their lives depend on it, it's going to result in some special stuff. And I think really cool stuff that will expand our mental model of what is mining. Because right now, I think for a lot of people, at least when they first trickle into it, it's like mining is a machine, or mining is a massive company that's tied into the grid that has all this like going in their warehouse. But it's like mining can also be radically different, done at a small scale, in vastly creative ways to harness nature's power that we now have a storage device for. And I think it's going to be really cool to see what happens.
Yeah. And we have, I had a chance about 8 weeks ago to spend quite a bit of time in El Salvador, and what they're trying to do with the volcano power, as they call it, is an example of that, because essentially the entire country sits on a geothermal hot spring, almost a massive percentage of the land. And so whether it's geothermal, whether it's a creek running through somebody's yard, and the miners replace the Fed. Ultimately, the miners replace the Fed. Okay, they are the mechanism by which money. But amazingly,
an honest replacement.
Excuse me.
An honest replacement.
An honest replacement, right? And so we let a guy that is a mango farmer in El Salvador, who happens to have a creek or a geothermal hot spring on his land, he can become part of the new Fed, and you know, it went from living in a country completely dependent on the whims. You know, they were a dollar-based economy, right? So they're completely dependent on some mysterious person in another place deciding what was going to happen with the money supply, to overnight being the Fed themselves and being part of the ecosystem that generates the money. Wild concept, right?
Yeah. And like, so amazing. And it's like, you know, part of the beauty about Bitcoin and part of this like cultural value set is anyone can play. Yeah. Anyone can play. It's not a rich person's game. It's not a privileged person's game. It is like, it's open for anyone to play. And I think that is like one of the coolest things about equality, is like this core value in Bitcoin to me, where it's like, it's hard coded into it so that the Bitcoin does not know or care who you are, how much money you have, where you live. It just doesn't. It doesn't even request that information. Yeah. And the fact that that's hard coded in there means that no one can actually put up that barrier at any time, because it's hard coded in there. And it makes it such that the mango farmer in El Salvador has the exact same opportunity as you and I, who are very lucky to be born with white skin in North America, to have gone to university, all that stuff. It's a level playing field, and how we play is going to be vastly different. But the fact that everyone can play, and everyone can honestly, with full transparency, see how the game is being played, and everyone can be their own sovereign arbiter to make sure the rules are being followed. That's the kind of world I want to live in. And I think that's like the deeper levels of what really makes Bitcoiners so energized with this whole thing, is that's what you're fighting for. That's what you're working on. Like I gave this analogy. I did a podcast with Greg Foss last week, and I was talking about this analogy that I keep thinking of like these massive citadels, these massive churches. I'm not religious, but I think these are marvels of architecture and like the ultimate proof of work, right? And we are the Masons currently putting down the foundation for this citadel of money, which will last for 1,000 years. And the people putting down the foundation are really determining the stability, the sturdiness, the foundational look of like, what is this going to look like? What is the culture going to look like? What are we creating? And we have to be sensitive to the fact that like, this is like, we're breaking ground. Yeah. We're still so early. And I think it's really cool that everyone can feel like they're a Mason building the citadel of money that will provide shelter and equal opportunity for humanity for the next 1,000 years. And that is like, it's just, it's a trip that we're alive at this point in time and have the opportunity to do that. That alone is like crazy, but it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it truly is an honor. I think it's also a responsibility.
I agree.
To do it too. And I can say, it's my belief that we have a one-time chance to get it right.
Yep.
Because if we don't get it right, if we get greedy, if we get our value set off track, we will lose. And the unholy trinity I talked about before will never let a threat arise again.
You're right. You're very right. So listen, an hour and a half flies by real fast, but I'd like to, if you're game, I got these kind of rapid fire, quick questions that I want to start to ask people. I'd like to ask you 3 of them, short, concise answers. There's no wrong answer, but I'd love to hear your take, and then we'll wrap it up. First one is, in a couple sentences, what does being a Bitcoiner mean to you? Because we throw around the term Bitcoiner all the time. There's no right or wrong answer. It's very subjective. But I want to ask every person I speak to that question so I can get an idea of what is the collective idea of what a Bitcoiner is.
Well, I think a Bitcoiner is somebody fighting for monetary freedom.
That's a powerful answer. I think that's good enough right there. Okay. Next question. What is your favorite wallet? What wallet are you using? Let's call it mobile wallet, with not very much funds, but what's your favorite one right now?
Well, I'll twist it a little bit. I mean, sure. I'm using Strike and the Lightning Network.
Beautiful.
So
amazing. Yeah, I'm in Canada. We don't have Strike yet, but I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, I'm later tonight. My wife is on her own little journey, and she's going to start doing Bitcoin apparel.
Amazing.
And while we were in El Salvador, one of the things we did was aligned with a manufacturer down there. And I'm going to send him a payment tonight on our initial purchase from my Strike wallet to his Chivo wallet in El Salvador. So.
And then when, what's the because I've been looking for some good Bitcoin swag and I haven't found any yet. So what's the, just as a plug, what's the ETA of when you're going to start doing that? And what's the name you're doing it under?
Probably be 4 to 6 weeks till stuff's available. And I don't have it. We don't have a name for it yet. So
that's okay. That's okay. I look forward to signing up for one of those shirts or whatever you end up making when they're available. And then my last question is, what's your favorite book recommendation for a beginner who is curious about Bitcoin, but knows literally nothing about it? So curiosity is kind of the main thing that they have. What's your favorite book recommendation right now?
Okay. He's a little controversial sometimes in today's world, but I think Andreas's work is still an awesome place for a beginner to start. So, I'd look at the works of Andreas Antonopoulos.
Amazing. The Internet of Money, Volume 1. That was literally my first book, and that's a powerful.
So I still think that's a great place to start, and obviously, if you read that, you won't stop there. So
yeah, exactly. That's like a fast track into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
The reason I asked that question is we're going to be creating learning protocols. So like a level 1 learning protocol is for the complete newbie. It's going to be a book, an article, a podcast, and a video, and make it very simple, very easy. And so I'm almost crowdsourcing recommendations for these protocols with people I speak to, so that we can just put that up, open source it, have it on the Stoa website, and have it be somewhere people can point people to. That is sort of the accumulated wisdom of everyone that we speak to on the Stoa, because I think collectively we, I always love hearing about a new book that I've never recommended or read. And I hear it from someone, I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I found that out, because now I have a new one that I could recommend to people. Bob, it's been a treat. I mean, this was the first time I've ever spoken to you or seen you in person, and you're a great storyteller. I think that's one thing. Like, I personally think that storytelling is the most powerful learning tool that we seem to have forgotten as humans. And I think that is what actually aligns with our deep physiology and how humans learn and take meaning from things is through story. So thank you for being a great storyteller and sharing your story and the story of barefoot mining. And I look forward to having you on Hash Power and diving deep into mining, because I think that's one thing that I'm kind of learning more about, is the math behind mining, the business of mining, all the problems that you need to solve, which there are many of in mining. And so I look forward to that. But thank you for joining us at the Stoa today. To everyone listening, thanks for being here. If you enjoyed the conversation, you can support the project by heading to bitcoinstoa.com, sending some sats to that QR code. And we will catch you at the next conversation at the Bitcoin Stoa. And thanks again, Bob, for being so generous with your time. I'm going to end the recording, but if you want to stick around for a minute or two, I'd love to do a sign off after we're done.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
All right, folks. Take care.